Tena koto, harimai ke tene hui, ki te mana whenua, rangatane, he mihi nui, tena koto, tena tato katoa. Very warm welcome to each one of you to this virtual space where we'll be hosting our Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting of the 30th of March, 2022. And just acknowledge our lead GM in support, which is David Murphy, our Chief Planning Officer, our Administrator, Sarah Claridge, and Advisor, Hannah White, and the other officers in attendance with us today. Just a few housekeeping matters. The first is that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. And we'd ask that all participants keep their cameras on, but their microphones muted unless they're addressing the meeting. Councillors, you're well familiar with this now, but please use the hands up function if you're wanting to ask a question, make a comment, or propose an amendment. And in the first instance, the text of any amendments should be emailed through to Sarah Claridge. The recommendations from the meeting will be displayed to screen, but they will also be read out so that anyone following online has the ability to hear those as well. Today we'll do the voting on the hands, so it would be a raised hand to cast a vote. Obviously, divisions available if needed. I will endeavor to ensure that you are introduced before you speak, but if I, for some reason, neglect to introduce you, please do ensure that your name is given so that it's on the record in that way. So move from there to the agenda proper. And first up, call for any apologies. We have an apology from Mr. Tarangi. We have an apology from Councillor Finley for early departure, and just received an apology from the Mayor for late arrival. Are there any other apologies? Okay, not seeing any indication of other apologies. I'll look to move those and ask for a seconder. Councillor Butt. Seconded by Councillor Butt, thank you. Excellent, and we'll ask for a vote on the apologies to be received. Thank you, and that looks to be unanimous. I've had no notification of additional items. Are there any? Not seeing any indications. Are there any declarations of interest? Likewise, not seeing any. I've had no notification of public comment and not seeing any indications from other elected members. So that moves us to the first substantive part of the agenda, which is the first of two presentations. This from Dr. Alana Ryan, who is the Sustainability Director at Massey University. And Alana's in the midst of a quite busy week at Massey, but has kindly agreed to join us in our Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting today to share where they're at in terms of their climate action plan, and really looking forward to hearing from you, Alana, in that regard. Your slides have been pre-circulated, but you're obviously welcome and encouraged to share them to screen as well, because the circulation's only gone to elected members at this stage. And you have 10 minutes to share with us through those slides, and then we'll have time for questions after that. So when you're ready, Alana, over to you, and thank you again for joining us.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the welcome and introduction, Brent, and it's great to be here today. We are in the middle of Climate Action Week at Massey, so my colleague Sal Lampkin has actually done most of the work on that, and Brent, I think, hasn't spoken yet, but will be speaking, so thank you for that and other contributions. I will share my screen just because it helps to prompt me. Let me find it. Here we go. So can you see the first slide there? It might just take a little bit of time to come through sometimes.
It has now appeared. It's there.
Okay, good. I just need to move you so you're on my screen. This is all very... Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about our climate action plan, and just to say that I'm really only presenting about the net zero carbon aspect of this. We have a much bigger component of the climate action plan, really, which deals with the university business, so teaching and learning, research, what we call cultural practice transformation, which is what we do with staff and students around trying to engage in encouraging sustainable and low carbon actions on campus, where people have a sphere of influence and able to make some contributions there. And I just also wanted to note that the Massey University strategy has recently been revised. It should be publicly available relatively soon, and that it now has a cross-cutting theme of sustainability and climate action, which means that focus is now woven through the whole of the university business. So that's a really important milestone, I think, for the university in terms of contributing to really embedding our understanding of the challenges of sustainability and climate action through everything that we do in the university. But as I said, I'm just going to focus on our net zero carbon work, because I think that's the aspect of what we're doing at the university that may be of most interest to you. And so on this first slide, what I've just tried to say a little bit is about how we've got to where we are now and where we're trying to get to. So sort of getting from naught, where we've done nothing, to getting from naught, we did very little prior to 2018, to naught in 2030, when we hope to be net zero carbon. And just to say a little bit about planning the change, because it has been quite a process to get to where we are today, and obviously any large organisation faces similar challenges. So in 2019, we spent a lot of time really understanding what our main emission sources were, and I'll talk a little bit about them soon, because that's really focused our attention in terms of what we're going to, I suppose, do most of our spend on in terms of getting to net zero carbon. The senior leadership team did approve that goal of being net zero carbon in 2030 and 2019. So that was really a bit of a motivator for the university, because now we had something to aim towards. But really, we didn't have very much detail about what the size of the problem was. We started to understand that, and how we're going to get to what the actions that we needed to take. So we started with consultation internally with staff and students about what was important and what we understood as an organisation we could do. But in 2020 and 2021, most of the work, the funded project around this mapping the pathway to low carbon Massey really began. So we revised our draft plan. We had the approval of the final climate action plan. So the link is in the first slide if anybody wants to look at that. But again, that's quite high level. So we've identified what we call emission reduction strategy. So they're the high level things that we want to focus on. We've identified some key initiatives, some of which we've started, some of which we plan to start in the coming years. But they really don't provide very much detail. And so really now we are in what I've called the red zone, which is this bit here. So we've gone through a kind of a change process in the sense of identifying what the scale of the problem is, what our opportunities are, and we want to move to developing our first carbon management plan, which we hope to have by the end of this year, which will be much more detailed in terms of identifying what we're going to do over the time frame that we're going to do, what sort of resources we're going to need to apply to those projects in terms of funding, staff and so on, so that we will then be able to embed our low carbon work into what we do in the university, so it becomes new BAU. So just in terms of a little bit about our baseline, so this really focused our minds in terms of understanding the university's greenhouse gas emissions. So unlike most universities, because of our farms, we have 27% of our emissions in 2018 were from farms, so that's mostly biological emissions, mostly methane, a little bit of nitrous oxide. The single highest emission source for the university, like most universities, is international air travel, because for the business of the university is about partly about research and academic reputation, and because of where we are in the world and to be globally connected, we need to fly a lot. So that's a very high proportion of our emissions. Land transport is really only about 2% of our emissions, so it's important for us, but it's not as big as international air travel. And of course, the other big component is energy, and there's a large component of natural gas as being an issue for us. So what I want to do is just quickly say something about how we're focusing on decarbonising energy, what we're doing about our buildings, and saying a little bit about travel, and especially international travel. So in terms of decarbonising energy, what we identified were 3 high-level strategies, emission reduction strategies. So improving business intelligence is quite important. So we need to understand better where our energy was being used, what buildings were using it the most, if we had leakage. And so in terms of the projects that we've got undergo now in 2021-22 is we had an energy transition accelerator report, which was funded by ECA. The next slide, I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. That was a really helpful piece of work to help us understand for each of our campuses where our opportunities for reducing emissions was. We've just employed 2 ECA-funded, part-funded graduates. So we have a carbon management officer and an energy efficiency officer. So they are really helping us with the work that we need to do, because most of our facility services staff are already stretched and it hasn't been their business to be focusing on carbon reduction. So we now have that extra capability. We've also done a little bit of work about space optimisation. So the university, we have lots of buildings, we're able to shrink some of that, and in doing that we can use less energy. In terms of reducing energy use, obviously we want to shift to more efficient energy assets, better thermal envelope for the buildings. There's a couple of examples there of work that we're doing. So in Wellington, one of the buildings we're replacing single with double glazing. LED replacements are happening throughout the university, and there are other smaller projects as well. And then finally, the really big one and the most important one for us, because natural gas is our biggest source of energy emissions, is to switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. Now, this is a big problem and an issue for us because it costs a lot of money. And we have a lot of infrastructure. We've got a lot of, it's not as simple as just kind of switching out a natural gas boiler and putting in a heat pump because of the infrastructure. So we're going through a process of investigating different options that are available to us, looking at the kind of cost benefit of that, and trying to understand also the impact of carbon and the price of carbon on us into the future. So that's a big piece of work that's being done this year. We're also looking at investigating solar array options on the Manawatu campus as one way also of helping us to shift to to electric options. So just a little bit about the Energy Transition Accelerator study. This is an opportunities analysis. Basically what Lumen did, the consultants, is that they looked at, this is the Manawatu campus, they looked at various options for us in terms of how we could reduce our energy and switch fuels, and gave us a sense of what the emission reduction savings would be, and also there was a cost analysis as well. So we're probably looking at option 3 in terms of fuel shifting, because option 4, distributed heat pumps, the ones which make the most sense on this campus. But again, we're still in the process of working through how we would do that, and where it makes sense to do that. So just a little bit about our buildings. So we have a mandate really that all new buildings will be 5 Green Star rated or equivalent. At the moment, there is very few. We aren't really planning on building a whole lot of new buildings, is what I'm trying to say. But those that we are building will have that rating or some equivalent. We have a commitment to a high level of energy efficiency and low carbon performance in our refurbishments. And just as an example, the Manawatu Library at the moment is undergoing a transformation. So this is a multi-year project, and we were able to get $2 million from the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund to help us with the low carbon aspects of that transformation. So just to give you a sense of, this is a busy slide, but just to give you a sense of what that fund is helping us support, is mostly what we see here is that so this is the natural gas component of the library. We're doing scenario 2C in terms of the build, which means getting rid of natural gas, so that immediately reduces our carbon in the building. But there's also a big piece of work being done around the refurbishment in terms of the facade, making it more thermally efficient, reducing solar gain and so forth. So having the ability to use that fund was really critical to us, because initially we didn't have the funding in the capital project team to do those things, and so the State Sector Decarbonisation Fund has really helped us do that. The last thing I just wanted to mention really was about international air travel. So this may not be such a big issue in relation to the Palmerston City Council, couldn't say, but I just wanted to mention it because I think often when we talk about net zero carbon and low carbon initiatives, we look to technology to be the solution. And the thing with international air travel is that we are trying to, at the university, co-design a solution with our staff, academic staff, because this is about behaviour change. So basically we want to have fewer staff getting on a plane and travelling a long way away as frequently as they used to. So we obviously, the context is that we are globally connected. Massey does not want to lose its reputation as a leader in various areas. So those kinds of connections are still important to us. But we have learned from COVID that we don't need to travel as often, that we can substitute in-person meetings with virtual conferences, and that perhaps we could shift to more regional in-person meetings that don't have to go so far away. And obviously, if we travel less, there are savings which can be put to other uses. So in terms of the process, we're looking for academic-led solutions so that this is not a top-down process. And so we're looking for solutions to come from academics, but also connecting with our internal decision-making structures. So those people who have responsibility in academic schools, academic board and so forth, and those who are in charge of the leave and travel policies are also part of that. And the last thing I'd sort of mention there is that requires a kind of culture change. So what does a post-2020, kind of post-COVID academic look like? Post, understanding that we live in an era of climate change. What does that look like if you're at the bottom of the world? So it probably involves much less travel, probably doesn't involve no travel. So it's a very complex picture. So I'm not sure if I've used up all my 10 minutes. I've just rattled along, but I'm really happy to take questions. And I see Selfika had his hand up.
Thanks, Alana. That's really appreciated, and amazing how practical a lot of the action plan is there in terms of those practical actions that you've outlined. So thank you for that. And yes, we do have a number of questions led off by Councillor Butt. So over to you, Zulfika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Alana, for your presentation. I have two questions. Number one, I can see that the majority of the emissions is coming from the travel or air travel. Are you considering only the staff air travel, or international student travel is also included in this inventory?
Currently, we're not counting international student air travel, but we will probably include that in our 2022 inventory. So then that would actually increase that amount that we've got there, and so I guess we'd have to look at that. But I think, again, that's an issue for all universities at this part of the world.
Thank you. My second question is, when you say that you are trying to shift to the, I remember when years ago Massey transferred its boiler from coal-powered system to gas. Everyone was happy that we have reduced big amount of greenhouse gases. Now we are talking about shifting to renewable energy. So when you say that you are shifting, are you thinking of producing your own energy or shifting to the companies who are producing electricity from renewable resources?
So we are looking at the potential of having a solar array on campus, in which case we would be producing it, but it's probably be in a partnership arrangement. So those conversations are ongoing. We haven't made any decisions about that, but we would probably mostly be purchasing renewable energy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Ryan, for presenting to us today. It was a wonderful presentation, and yeah, great to see the progress there. You've talked a bit about the process from, I guess, knowing that we've got a climate emergency and trying to get to a plan to sort of solve it. What advice would you give to other organisations that are embarking on that journey, and what do you think council can do to sort of support any of that? Or
Sure. So I think understanding that your footprint is the first thing, because understanding what's material to you. So, for example, in our case, waste is a tiny amount of our emissions, but a lot of people are very concerned about it. It's not that it's not important, but it's not as material as energy and farms and international airports. I think international air travel. So I think knowing where your emissions come from is critical, and then I guess looking for opportunities to partner with others where possible. Getting support. So with the carbon neutral government program, there's a lot of support available there now for people in the public sector, and other organisations can also get support through Sustainable Business Council. So I think there are a lot of people now who are working in this space, and there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared. So I think we're in a much better space now than we were even 2 or 3 years ago in terms of knowledge and ability to kind of share that knowledge.
Sorry, and what do you think council's role is then within all of this?
So that's a very good question. So there's a couple of levels of that. So some of it's, I suppose, about the fact that, as citizens coming to understand what the impact of climate action is on them, and how, as an organisation, what you do will help support a low carbon future. So all the ways that in fact you are looking at things around active transport, shifting away from, I suppose, this idea that you've got to get in your car to drive everywhere. I think council has a role to play in working with organisations and other sort of public sector, I suppose, and also community groups. So I think there are opportunities around collaboration. I think it's quite, I haven't got the answer to that, but I think there's a space there. And I know, so I've talked about this with David Murphy and with Adam lots of times about how we can get people together who have got a similar kind of focus. And there isn't a sort of a template that we can use, because we're sort of in slightly uncharted times. So I think getting together and working out where the opportunities for collaboration are is really important. And I think council has a role in helping make that happen, because of the responsibilities you have in terms of the kind of boundaries of the city and so forth. So I think that's a key role for council. And I think the university can also help with that as well, because we have a great knowledge base. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there that we haven't quite grasped yet. And there are other parts of the world, like Manchester, for example. We've got a very strong relationship between the city council and the university for a long time now around kind of living lab approaches to climate action. So I think there are opportunities there that we could really develop.
Excellent. Thanks very much. That's very helpful, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Ryan, for your presentation. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is just around what action, if any, you're planning around reduction of your farm emissions.
Yep. So the farms, I have to say, are a challenge. We're definitely on farm. They are managing emissions as much as possible, in the sense of there are various technologies there. But because if we were to, for many farms, you can reduce stock numbers, you can become more intensive, and you can still be productive. For the university, if we were and because the biggest reductions will come from reducing stock numbers, if we were to do that, we may not be able to do the range and the scope and the quantity of research that we want to do. So there is a point at which, and we're still talking about this, we don't really know the answer to this, but there's a point at which we have to accept that, because we might, in fact, not reduce the emissions on our farm very much. We can still plant trees, that's something we're looking at, but we might not reduce them very much, because we want to produce research that will help the rest of the nation and the world reduce emissions. So it's a bit of it's a difficult and complex issue there.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure if you had the silver bullet, we would have heard about it.
There's no silver bullet.
And I just would like to get an idea, if it's possible, without compromising any sort of business confidentiality or anything, how much in terms either of staff resource or costs putting your climate action plan together has cost? I just want to try and quantify, maybe for other businesses that are thinking of doing it, and also for ourselves to see, to have a sort of comparison as to whether or not we're adequately resourcing this area. So as far as you're able to share,
Sure.
can you give me some idea of cost or staff or whatever to do this work?
Sure. Well, so to date, so there's my salary. I have a administrator, and then we have academic staff who are involved in an advisory group to help pull together the initial plan. But we did this, so we did have that funded project mapping the pathway to net zero carbon. So that was a $200,000 funded project. Most of that was spent on a range of external consultants providing us with advice around our options. We've probably spent in the vicinity of another 100K on energy and carbon performance reports and the energy transition accelerator. But some of that has also been part funded through ECA, so we have used our relationship with ECA to help part fund those. And in going forward, so we have these two new energy ECA graduates. So they the cost of the university is not we're being supported 75% by ECA, so their salaries not costing us very much. So I think that's a great resource that I think, if possible, you should tap into. So I would say, roughly, we would have spent maybe 500K in terms of, this is very rough,
Yeah, that's okay.
time and funded projects. And so I think we're at a stage now where actually we can start to pull that into the capability we've already got, and with those ECA graduates. So there'll still be some money that we need to spend in terms of some consultation and so forth. But we've got to that stage now where we've got a really good idea of what our roadmap is, and we just now need to put that into our business as usual. And that will go through to our capital, our 10-year capital plan process, and so forth. Yeah.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Just a final question from me, Alana. Be really interested to get your sense now of how confident, how comfortable you are that meeting that goal that's been endorsed is achievable.
Yes, it's achievable. It's not cheap. It's, we've still to, so one thing I didn't mention is we have had a report done on a sort of a pre-feasibility study about carbon insetting. So that would be about growing our own carbon forest. There are other options to us, because I think so our target is to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030. I think we can do better than that. But still in 2030, we may have, 15,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, which we need to offset. So there will be a cost to that. So we're still working through that, but I think the university is committed to that. Every other university is doing this work. So it's just something which we will work through and find the solution to it. Because, and as you know, all other public sector organisations need to be net zero carbon by 2025. So we've got a little bit more time up our sleeves.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Alana, and we certainly wish you well. There's no further questions in the queue, so that does conclude your active involvement in the discussion, Alana, but you're most welcome to stay in the meeting. We'll move to the recommendation, and there may be comments from members that you may be interested to listen in on as well. So we'll just look to the recommendation, and it is that the committee resolves that the presentation be received for information. Is there somebody that would like to move that? Councillor Johnson, and seconded by Councillor Dingwall. Open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to thank again Dr. Ryan for the presentation, and I think it's very helpful for not only for us but also for other organisations in the city and nationally to get a sense of what's required to do this kind of work. There'll be lots of organisations that are not as far on in their planning, and I think it's helpful to see how someone else has done it. I thought it was a very useful comment that was made around the most important thing is to understand your own footprint, and every organisation will be very different. Ours, for example, as council is quite different. We don't have the if we don't have the international air travel, that's for sure. But you know, that's an important thing, to use the evidence that you have to determine what your best action is, rather than having a feeling that something is important that might actually only be a very small percentage of emissions. So I think that's a very good advice that we can you know, pass on to other people that might be considering the process. And there are a couple of questions I asked around farms and around the cost and sort of capacity needs of this. You know, as a country, with our agricultural emissions, we have got a challenge, I think, as Dr. Ryan described it, as to how we deal with those, whether or not they're able to be reduced by much, and also whether or not they need to be offset rather than actually reduced. And I am aware that there is some research going on at Massey around genetic reduction, you know, production of animals that produce less carbon. And that sort of research will be important, but I expect it's not going to be necessarily producing results in the next year or two. In terms of the sort of cost and capacity to do this kind of reporting, I think it is important for organisations to understand what the budget is, but more importantly, what is available in terms of support from other organisations like ECA and the government, so that this needn't be something that a business has to do on their own. There's support and finance available, and I certainly hope that there are lots of organisations in the city that take note of what Massey have done and use that as a bit of a model for themselves. So thank you again, Dr. Ryan.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I basically wanted to thank Dr. Ryan for her presentation. Just one interesting point. I have analyzed the emissions from Massey and their target for the next few years. And if we compare targets, City Council targets and Massey University targets, they are same 30% reduction. And if we consider the full-time staff dealing with these emissions, Massey has got, as far as I understand, at least 3 full-time staff to look after these emissions, which are only 30,000 tons. And if you look at city councils or citywide emissions, they are almost 600,000 tons. And we are providing only 2 or 3 people to look after all these matters. So this is for my colleagues to think about it, and the next budget or the next 10-year plan, we might have to reconsider our thinking around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. Just by way of final comment, certainly do appreciate, Dr. Ryan, you making the time and sharing with us in some detail what you're setting out to achieve. I found it in kind of equal parts inspiring and informing, and I think it will be very helpful for not only City Council, but other large organizations in the region to get their head around how it's being approached through the university and seeing what that means in terms of their organizations and their businesses. I think it's really, really timely, you know, probably over time, some would say. But a number of organizations, including City Council, really seeking to move in this space, and so seeing your action plan was really helpful in that regard. Massey is clearly a strategic partner for the city, and it's really an area where I think those strategic interests are quite well aligned, and it would be good to see continued endeavor to have a strong connection between what the university is setting out to achieve and how they're setting out to achieve it with what the city is working towards as well. So thank you again, Dr. Ryan. Please do pass our appreciation on to your team and leadership team at the university for what they're doing in the climate space.
I will thank you. I might note that actually there is a joint meeting on Friday between Massey University and PNCC senior leaders on both sides to talk about what our opportunities are. So, and I'll be at that meeting, so I'll certainly take the opportunity to highlight this.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. So with that, we will look for a vote on the recommendation. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? one abstention from the mayor. That has passed. Which moves us on to the next item in the agenda, which is the second presentation, which is from Mr. Andrew Eagles. He is the Chief Executive of the New Zealand Green Building Council. And as you might take from the name of the organization, they are deeply involved in helping address the sustainability opportunities in the building sector and building, especially around new buildings. And so welcome, Andrew. Really appreciate you making the time to be with us virtually today. And I see your slides are already prepared to go. We've got 10 minutes to share with us by way of presentation, and beyond that there will be scope for questions, and really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So over to you when you're ready.
Kia ora, ina mana, ina rea, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to the conversation. We're a not-for-profit established by the construction and property sector, and our vision is all kinds of building Aotearoa green and sustainable, making healthier. Our membership includes many councils, including yours, Auckland City Council, all of the universities, and 600 other members covering property and construction. Just talk a little bit about context, buildings and communities, homes, and then some key steps that you can take. First of all, just to touch on what we focus on when we're driving change in terms of lower carbon, more sustainable future. That includes healthier buildings, but also resilience to climate change and carbon emissions. We create these tools with the sector. So one of the things I just wanted to touch on is we're seeing more councils specify lower carbon, healthier buildings when they build, and this is incentivised through the local government funding authority requirements. If you're seeking green finance at a lower rate from them, you'll be required to build to the Green Star standard. And the other thing that you can do, this is often missed, is that you can specify fit out to lower carbon standards such as the Green Star interiors standard when you're fitting out, say, a library, a museum, an office building. And why would you do this? Well, you do this because you can significantly lower your carbon impact. So we have here on the left the example of Turanga Christchurch's library that has been built to Green Star standard, 5-star, and is designed to emit 72% fewer carbon emissions than a comparable building. And you can see there the standard reductions in carbon emissions from lower carbon, healthier buildings that Green Star deliver. Another example is fit out. So here, Auckland Council used Green Star Interiors tool when they were fitting out, and I just thought sometimes it's nice to have a real practical example. This drove them to recycle the ceiling tiles, and because they did this, the company recycling those ceiling tiles was able to invest in a new plant to do that, and that increased the recycling rate of that material from 60% to up to 80%, significantly reducing waste going to landfill for all future projects. So the actions you take when fitting out or building new change the whole supply chain, and how we're doing that across Aotearoa. So what you get when you use this methodology is you get the proven evidence at the built stage of the change impacted. So most fit outs, most of the waste from that goes through to landfill, but here we could evidence that 70% of the waste was recycled and over 12% was reused, meaning a significant diversion away from landfill. We're also seeing central government take up these standards. So as part of the government's carbon neutral program for the public sector, they will specify 5 Green Star on all new buildings that they are building, above 25 million this year, and any building above 9 million from next year. So we're now seeing councils such as Auckland and Wellington Council and Tauranga just pick up that requirement. So they're specifying Green Star on any new buildings. And they're also specifying requirements when they're looking to lease a building to seek energy efficient buildings. So here you've got that second bullet point down. They're asking for 4-star NABERS certificates when they lease office buildings. And that ensures their office building is lower cost to run and lower carbon. So the key steps you can take here is you can assess your office against the NABERS rating, as Kapiti, New Plymouth, Christchurch, Wellington and other councils are doing, and that's been mandated by central government. And you can assess your community assets in a similar way with a tool called Green Star Performance. And just moving on to large projects such as master planned communities, we've had a lot of interest in how to ensure projects of over 200 homes or large buildings can be more resilient to a changing climate. So we've brought in an international tool called Green Star Communities, used in South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. And this helps ensure projects are benchmarked internationally on resilience to climate change, stakeholder engagement, livability, and low carbon outcomes. So it covers things like lower carbon greenhouse gas strategy, sustainable transport, but also local employment, incentives, education to drive that community to be really resilient and robust for future changes we may see, and Tiaranga design principles. So we have a 3,000 home development happening in the Waikato taking this up, a scheme in Wellington, Northland, 5 schemes in Auckland. Really interested to talk to your team about this. Over 60 projects in Australia across residential, commercial buildings and others, from smaller to large projects. And here are some examples from New Zealand, Takapuna, Henderson. So what this rewards is working well with mana whenua, community investment, community infrastructure, uplifting education and skills as part of this community development. I know I haven't got much time, but just saying, if you have large schemes, we find that people doing these schemes are often really thrilled to have the ability to benchmark against international best practice and resilience to climate change. Let's finish with a couple of points about policy levers you could use to drive change. And these are where you can encourage the private sector to drive change. The homes we're building at the moment are 5 times larger than our carbon budget. 5 times. That's the operational carbon, so the energy used to run our homes, also the embodied carbon emissions. We've created a tool called HomeStar. It's lower carbon, it factors in lower embodied carbon and lower operational carbon. We've had 5,000 registrations in the last 6 months. Here's an example. Otautahi Community Housing Trust built 90 homes with 7 HomeStar. There'll be warmer, less running costs, lower carbon transport options. And here are these providers all building thousands of homes per year to this standard. Kāinga Ora are building all of their homes to HomeStar 6 or above as they look to decarbonise their housing assets and produce warmer, healthier homes for our tamariki and mokopuna. So one thing you can do, it's a free thing you can do. There's no cost, there's hardly any administration, is you could put on limbs whether homes have a HomeStar rating or a HomeFit rating or not. That's a zero cost initiative you could take. Other policy initiatives you could take are reducing fees for those buildings that are lower carbon or more resilient when people are going through consenting. You could provide greater density for homes that are lower carbon, more resilient. You could reduce your infrastructure growth charge. You could provide more consenting support. You could reduce development contributions, as Wellington City Council has done. And you could also just educate the sector through information on your website and out through your e-bulletins. This transition to lower carbon homes and buildings is happening. We've had a 5-fold increase in the uptake of lower carbon buildings using Green Star, and a 10-fold increase in the uptake of Homestar as we drive this forward. Taking these things up will save taxpayers money, build healthier communities, increase resilience to climate change, lower carboning operations in your community. Thanks a lot. I look forward to the questions. Was that in time, Chair?
Thank you, Andrew. That was perfectly timed and a lot of really practical information in those slides. Just an administrative matter, I hope you'd be willing to share those slides with our administrator that we could have on record. I think it'd be really helpful given the number of practical tips in there. If you're ready for some questions, we have a couple, yes. With the first being from the Mayor.
Kia ora, thanks, Mr. Chair. Andrew, great to see you finally after a few online connections. Look, thanks for your presentation. Are there many? I'm aware of a couple, but do you know of many construction companies in Palmerston North or the wider Manawatu, or buildings that have been built to a higher Green Star level?
I'd have to research with the team. Sorry, I don't have that to hand. I would be surprised if you didn't have homes being built to Homestar standard, because we have, as I say, 5,000 homes registered in the last 6 months and over 10,000 homes in a prior period. In terms of Green Star, I would hesitate to say absolutely yes, but we are seeing a lot more uptake in the regions, as I say, Tauranga, New Plymouth, Hamilton, and others taking that up. So I think now's a great opportunity.
And Palmerston North City Council is a member of the New Zealand Green Building Council?
Yes. Yep.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for your presentation, and I hope our staff are watching it. Thank you.
Councillor Beatty.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Andrew, for your really interesting presentation. Andrew, could you please tell me what the build cost per square metre difference? You showed that those 90 homes with the 7 Homestar rating. So what would be the difference in the build cost per square metre of those homes?
Yeah, so it was really interesting when we brought out Homestar. We had quite a few people push back and say it was going to cost 10 to 12% more. And they wrote to ministers setting this out. We had Rawlinson's, the international QS firm, look at this. They found that building to above building code, those Homestar standards are 1 to 2.5% more. And they reduce running costs considerably. And that's been backed up by the senior QSs of development firms. So roughly 1 to 2.5% more to deliver that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Just a couple questions from me then. One follows on from Councillor Beatty. So is that calculation of the marginal increase in upfront cost easily translated into payback periods for people that are considering going into this approach?
Yeah, so the way the World Green Building Council talks to this is that if you take the capital costs of construction, you're looking at that region of cost for either Green Star or Homestar, so 1 to 2.5%, and the payback through the life of the building is 20% of the capital cost of that build. So, and that excludes benefits such as people being healthier and warmer and getting sick less often, and it excludes the benefits of a lower carbon electricity grid. It's just the benefits of the running costs in a better building. Yeah, and I guess one thing I didn't touch on is buildings are 20% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, but where we build well, we can also reduce other emissions such as transport emissions through density and providing e-transport options. So, potential. But Brent, you had other questions, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, one further question, just to ask around the green communities aspect, in terms of when in the planning approval process that begins and sort of how it reaches through the stages of actually developing a new subdivision.
Yeah. So with all these tools, you get greater uptake in fewer costs and hurdles where you start as soon as possible. So we have had people further down the design wanting to take up these tools, and what we say is it's just not worth it. It's likely that you aren't hitting some of these objectives, and therefore it's better if you don't try that. So we wanted to get involved right at the very start, and that's what we're seeing in the Green Star Communities projects in the Waikato, Northland, Wellington and Auckland.
Right. So when you say right at the very start, that's in terms of preparing materials to go into a district plan change type decision, or is it even earlier than that in terms of land acquisition and that sort of stuff?
No, that would work. Yep, I think yeah, it doesn't need to be happening at land acquisition stage. Great,
thank you. There don't appear to be any further questions, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you again, Andrew. Much appreciated. We'll move on to having elected members' comments, and you're more than welcome to stick around and listen in on those. But this does conclude the active contribution to the meeting from you. Much appreciated. Thank you, and we will look forward to the slides being available for our reference.
Thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to working with you. Happy day.
Thanks, Andrew. We can just see the recommendation. We have a recommendation in front of us that the committee resolves that the presentation be received for information. I'll ask for somebody to move that. I can't see many hands. Counts the mayor, and seconded by Councillor Johnson. So open up for comments, and first the mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, thank you, Andrew, for presenting to us. This has been a long time coming. Andrew and I have been communicating off and on for a couple of years now, unfortunately during COVID, where we tried to connect and actually host a couple of forums down here to educate not only our community, but actually the construction sector and building sector on the benefits of green building. I think we've just experienced some of the real benefits that Andrew listed. And Andrew, we do have a building. I just was checking whether you knew about it. It's the New Higgins head office at our industrial park is a new Green Star building. And I had the honour of going through it just recently, and I was amazed how they can use concrete in a really efficient way to make it a better product. We saw there what made me the ceiling tiles being recycled, and I can only think of our own building here and the ceiling tiles that unfortunately have probably gone to the landfill. But I think there's some real benefits in promoting this wider. I know other companies like Macmillan and Lockwood, Colspec Construction are companies that are building to a Green Star level. So I think it's only a good thing to do. So thank you, Chair, for getting the Green Building Council to present to us, to our staff that have taken the initiative to sign council up as members. I know when I first got into this office, there was a bit of resistance in being involved. That is all now gone. So I think it's only a good thing. So thank you again to the Green Building Council. I look forward to maybe seeing another presentation with some Palmerston North homes and buildings in it. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much, Andrew, for the presentation, which was really interesting. My question is really to Mr. Murphy, if that's okay, Chair, through you. There were quite a lot of practical suggestions that Andrew made in his presentation that it seems to me that we could reasonably easily implement. I wonder if I could just have a comment from staff about whether or not they feel that they need direction from council to implement some of those, or whether or not they could just go ahead and do that.
It's probably a little bit of both, Councillor Johnson. So some of those changes around the limbs are operational matters that could be made without direction. Some of those broader suggestions around sort of reduced development contributions policy and and sort of all council buildings being Green Star, I think would require a policy decision from the council.
So I think in order to decide whether or not we went down that route, we would need some kind of report back on the implications. What's the would that impose a lot of extra work on staff?
There is some overlap, I guess, with the New Zealand Green Building Council and Green Star Buildings and the reports that are coming later in the agenda today in terms of our low carbon roadmap and internal asset value optimisation. So I think a report back on the New Zealand Green Building Council and implementation of Green Star would be the best way to go about that. It may well be that report back occurs alongside some of the broader climate change work that's happening in the council, but yes, I would recommend a report back on those policy options.
Okay, thank you for that. In which case, Chair, I'll just indicate that I'll work on a recommendation to that effect and email it to Sarah whilst the rest of the comments are continuing, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I look forward to seeing that come through in a couple of moments' time. Not seeing any other comments at this stage, so I will just contribute from my own perspective as chair to say, of course, thank you, Andrew, for the time. Really admirable the work that's being done, and exciting to see the growth of interest and impact that the Green Building Council is having, bringing some international best practice into the New Zealand context and making it available for the development community. It was really fantastic. As the mayor's alluded to, we have a lot of building development on the cards here, both in terms of the commercial industrial as well as the residential, and these sort of tools are very exciting to think about what they could do to help us ensure that the major expansion that we're looking at over the coming decade will really go the distance in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of also being great livable environments, livable homes that are warm and cost efficient to run. Really pleased to hear about the positives around the payback periods and those sort of things. I think helping people over those initial reactions around hesitancy of upfront costs are quite well met with those sort of return on investment figures. So that's very heartening to hear as well. So thanks again for the time, and we will look for Councillor Johnson's recommendation in due course.
Mr. Chair, could I speak to my recommendation, or would you like to get it on the screen first? I need to look for a seconder, please. Okay, I see the Mayor, Councillor Dingwall, so whoever was first, I don't know. Thank you both. Am I okay to speak to this recommendation, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, so just following on from the very practical suggestions in Andrew's presentation and the comments from the Chief Planning Officer, I thought it would be good to just establish the support or otherwise, but I assume it will be support of Council for the direction of looking at where we can use the levers that are available to us in terms of policy change to be able to embed some of these recommendations in what we do. And as the Chief Planning Officer said, some of it may be operational matters that can be done without direction from Council, but for some of the other issues, I think it's really good to establish where we want to be headed. So I do hope that you'll support this.
Great, thank you. Are there any other comments on the recommendation of the Mayor?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I think it's a sensible recommendation. It's about influencing influencers too, and I think council's got to be one of those influencers. Some of the recommendations and the slides we were showing is all pretty straightforward, sensible stuff, and it's just putting another check into the system, and I think it's just sensible. So this is the way the world has to go. As you said, Mr. Chair, we've got a lot of construction going on, and instead of just chucking it all in the skip, is there another way? We can sort things before it all just automatically goes to a landfill, or is there better ways of constructing stuff which gives us, long-term benefits further down the line? So, look, all sensible stuff should really be a no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll just ask for the recommendation to come back to screen so that I can read it out, and then with everyone's permission, we'll vote on both of them together unless there is a request to take them separately. So we have the first recommendation that the committee resolves that the presentation be received for information, and the second recommendation that the Chief Executive report back to the Environmental Sustainability Committee on the options and implications of policy changes relating to the Green Building Council recommendations to Council. I'd ask for the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Not seeing any. Any abstentions? Likewise, not seeing any. I think that's passed unanimously. Thank you all for that. That will move us on to the next item in the agenda, which is the minutes of the Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting. We can get that recommendation to screen. Recommendation is the committee resolves that the minutes of Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting of 17 November 2021, Part 1, public, be confirmed as a true and accurate record, which I'm happy to move. Ask for a seconder. Councillor Beatty. Are there any corrections or clarifications needed before we go to the vote? I'm seeing none. I'll ask that we vote. All those in favor? Excellent, thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Again, seeing none, that is passed.
Sorry, Chair. I'm not sure if you can see me on the screen, but I abstained from it because I was in that meeting.
Oh, thank you, Councillor McLeod. I didn't see that in my gallery view, so thanks for that. And we'll ask that the administrators record an extension for that. All right, that moves us to item 8, the first of 2 substantive items in the agenda around confirmation of gross versus net organizational emissions reporting, and this is a report coming to us from Adam Jarvis, our Senior Climate Change Advisor. Adam, over to you to make any comments you have around the report prior to receiving any questions.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, tēnā koutou councillors. I'm happy to sort of largely take the report as read, except to say this is largely about just the clarification of committee's intentions in the most recent proceeding committee, and to formalise exactly which set of emissions, or which whether we're talking about gross or net emissions with respect to our Eco-City strategy target, which has been inferred before but never formally approved. So you can see my recommendations there, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. Are there any questions for Adam? Don't appear to be any questions. That's up. Sorry, the mayor I see on the gallery view. Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair. I just double checking the report. And Adam, In terms of the emissions trading scheme, has the council sold any of our forestry credits at all?
Through the chair, yes, we have. Some of unfortunately, I don't have the details to hand, but that's managed through the finance unit. Essentially, some of our larger commercial forestry blocks, where those blocks are eligible, we have been selling emissions credits, and that's been recorded as revenue.
Sure, and understand. And how long is that? Is that more in more recent times, or is that what sort of timeline are we talking?
I couldn't confirm exact details, but I believe that would be the case essentially since the inception of the emissions trading scheme in the first decade of this millennium.
Okay. Could I, Mr. Chair, if I could just ask the officer, perhaps if we only need a couple of paragraphs on what that is and when, sent to all elected members. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing no further questions, I think we can move to consideration of the two recommendations, if we can get those to screen. Thank you, Adam, for being there to answer those questions. So we have two recommendations in front of us that the committee resolves. One, that the Eco-City strategy target of a 30% reduction in citywide carbon emissions is confirmed to relate to net emissions, inclusive of sequestered carbon. And secondly, that the Council's own organizational emissions progress is confirmed to relate to net emissions, inclusive of sequestered carbon. I'll look to move that if there's a seconder. Councillor Michalad. Just to open up comments then around this, firstly want to acknowledge and thank the elected members that brought this to our attention last year, and the work that the officers have done just to bring us this clarification. I'm comfortable enough with it in terms of the fact that it gives us alignment with other reporting mechanisms, and noting that, much like efforts to measure the economy, we will end up measuring emissions changes in a lot of different ways: gross, net, per capita, etc. And so quite comfortable to see this approach recognized. I would sound, though, a note of caution and perhaps somewhat skepticism in terms of how far we go down relying on offsets and relying on net emission approaches. Greenhouse gas emissions they're pretty much like any other form of pollution. You can do a whole lot better if you can actually prevent the problem in the first place, rather than trying to mop it up with a whole lot of trees or mop it up with other aspects. And as we've seen in New Zealand of recent times, there's real political pushback and resistance around walls of trees going up. And again, if we want to get on top of our emissions, the best way to do that is really by focusing on managing down our gross emissions. So while I'm comfortable with this as a reporting approach, I would not want us to get distracted into looking at trade-offs, offsets, and relying on those, rather than actually getting on with the work of managing down our emissions in the first place, because we can't, ultimately offset our way to sustainability. We need to actually do the work to manage those down. So with that, I will say, though, that I will vote in favor of this, excuse me, and am comfortable with the direction here. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And look, I agree with your general comments. There's a balance to it all too, and it is good to know what the offsets are, and that's why I was keen to get that information for elected members. Is it small? Is it large? Is it medium? We just need to really understand what it is. But you are right. Deal with the problem where it starts. And I think we are making reasonably good progress. Interestingly, as I sit on the Regional Climate Action Committee with my fellow mayoral colleagues and the regional chair, we have taken some steps in this space, and it's good to see our auditor, Toitu, coming up with some real hard facts there. And I would hope that our colleagues, and a note to our other TA partners, that they start to do this work as well, because then we can all be sort of understand what the issues are. The city can do its role, but everybody else around us isn't. Then we've still got the bigger problem. So thanks for bringing this forward, and just be interesting to see what those carbon credits actually are, and we've got all the facts at hand. But I'll support this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There appear to be no further comments, so I'll ask for the recommendation back to screen for people's awareness of what we're voting towards. And I'll forego right of reply and go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor? Great, thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Again, seeing none. So that is passed. Which moves us on to item number 9, which is another report from Adam Jarvis, Senior Climate Change Advisor. This is the low carbon roadmap. Refer you to page 19 in the agenda. And again, Adam, invite you to introduce the report and then be available for any questions that elected members may have. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you. Just share my screen here. Just have a short presentation. Perhaps the most complicated topic I've yet had the pleasure to present. Actually, just before I move on to the presentation, I'd hoped to do this in person, but I just wanted to take the moment to introduce you to our new climate change analyst, David Watson. Just started with us immediately prior to Christmas. Comes from a long career working as an ecologist and delivering cycleways across Great Britain. And we're very, very lucky to have him. Here he is.
Great. Thanks, Adam, and welcome, David. Good to see you here.
So, just pull the presentation back up. So, I guess one of the key messages I'd like to get across here is just how dramatically the situation has changed since we've gone down this path. You can look back to work that occurred 2009, 10, 11 with the Corporate Climate Change Action Plan and a range of covenants and things that we signed up to. The beginning of our emissions inventories and when I started here in 2015, and then up to the 2018 Eco-City strategy and the 25% at the time reduction target being set. Large ambition for us to take really the leading role in reducing emissions citywide. And it's something of a simplification, but I think it would be fair to say that this was done largely in the absence of significant national policy direction. Whereas in the last few years, that's as you see with the passage of the Zero Carbon Amendment Act, the creation of the Climate Change Commission, we've had a climate emergency nationally declared. The government has published its first set of emissions budgets that it is looking to send a very strong signal there in terms of its expectations, not only in terms of the state sector, but also the country as a whole, in terms of where we'd be going. And then late last year, we had the opportunity to submit on the draft emissions reduction plan, which is expected to be published in May, which should give us significantly more guidance in terms of what central government actions we can expect to see both nationally and locally. Accompanying all this work, central government agencies, departments have also undergone significant transformation in terms of their own strategic directions, which are increasingly recognising climate change and emissions reductions as either one of, or even in some cases, the key driver in terms of their investment decisions. Notably, for example, the government policy statement on transport has seen a dramatic shift there in terms of what it is that they're looking to achieve. So how this all plays out and how we fit into that is still a picture is beginning to emerge through the draft emissions reduction plan, but there's a lot of work still to be done in terms of understanding exactly how we can best deploy what is ultimately a set of resources as council that is a small fraction of the resources that national government has, even within the city, let alone in terms of national reach through advertising or whatever. So with that being said, I think it's as we discussed last year in council workshop, I think we can still understand that barring any major changes to the structure of local government, as far as we can see at the moment, these four elements are likely to be the key areas in which we can deliver the greatest impact per unit resource that we expend. And these are the areas that we have other policy levers or significant policy levers rather to influence. Land use planning, obviously, controlling the district plan, having a large role in its drafting. Transport, with the exception of the state highways, significant control over the way that our streets are designed and managed. Our own organisational emissions, and then obviously the intersection of land use planning and our own forests and the ways in which we either encourage or discourage forestry in the hill country behind the city. So looking to sort of pending changes in the emissions reduction plan sort of formalise that these are likely to remain our priorities in the future. So in the body of the report, you'll see in the sort of the infographic that we've included in I believe the appendix, that we're proposing for the myself and David primarily, but the organisation more generally in terms of its climate change work, three broad work streams. One of which I've yet to come up with a better name for, but asset value optimization is a sort of a working title, which I'll get to in a moment, and which I think really ties in with a lot of the discussion that we've received already today from Green Building Council and from Massey. I think there's a lot of overlap there in terms of that discussion. There's the second bullet point there. Elected members will be aware that we are expecting to deliver a low carbon feasibility study to the September committee. So depending on the direction that we receive there, there's potential that we're looking at additional work above and beyond merely in the first instance reducing total lifetime costs and reducing carbon at the lowest possible or negative costs. Instead, if we're talking about carbon neutrality, there's likely to be additional work required in order to get us on that path, some of which will have to start quite within the next LTP cycle. And then finally, this broader work of how do we influence and manage citywide reductions. So all of those are already ongoing, and there's likely to be, or there will be, a series of touch points to future committees leading up to the next long-term plan, where I guess you could broadly say the rubber will hit the road. However, to come back to that idea of asset value optimization, essentially what we're talking about here is improving the way in which we make investments. So to date, this is I guess broadly true, though there's plenty of examples where more detailed work has been done, but that we've largely been focused on through the LTP, and then subsequently when it comes to program delivery, upfront capital costs in isolation of the operational costs or returns of those programs, including interest on the capital invested. So what we're seeking to do is analyse as broadly as we can the programs that we're looking to deliver, options for delivery of those programs, such that we're minimising the total lifetime cost of those projects, and delivering projects that reduce carbon at as low, or even in many cases, as we've seen through the Low Carbon Fund, which in last week's Finance and Audit Committee you will have seen something of a indication of, but we're expecting to deliver a more detailed annual report to you in September. But essentially we've identified, even just with a relatively narrow analysis, and investment opportunities that are simply reduce costs to ratepayers, and carbon savings are in some respects just a bonus on top of that. So we're looking to broaden that work out and understand as much as possible of the programs being presented to you through the following long-term plan deliberations, that analysis has been done, and that what's being presented is as much as possible low carbon and low cost. Thankfully, there's often not quite a bit of overlap, as we've heard already today. So final slide here, I guess we will be continuing to deliver on the Low Carbon Fund. That, as we indicated in that infographic, I think that provides quite a degree of flexibility throughout, or in the midst of a long-term planning cycle. There's a number of reports that we'll be delivering to the September committee, but a key one of which, from our view, is the low carbon feasibility study, and the guidance that you give us there will determine to what extent we are looking merely to reduce carbon at the lowest possible cost, or are we taking investment in actions that are more targeted at sort of that 2050 or whatever date we seek to be net neutral, or and sorry, this is actually a typo here. It's not a low carbon feasibility study. Zero carbon feasibility study is what's been asked of us, so that's what we'll be delivering. So that should say zero carbon, or net zero carbon. So understanding what it would require above and beyond merely whole of life cost analysis in order to achieve that. Yes. Excuse me. So you can see the final 2 points there, but essentially there's a lot of work to be done over this coming year and in the lead up to the next LTP, where we understand the emissions reduction plan, the national emissions reduction plan, due in a couple of months, and then develop a series of programs that work within those funding streams available. One minor note, just that I'll end on, is that what isn't necessarily clear, and where there's still a fair degree of ambiguity about, is the distinction of what is and isn't state sector. Dr. Alana Ryan mentioned earlier today about funding that they'd received through ECA for state sector decarbonisation fund, for example. We aren't actually eligible for that as it currently stands, although there are some signals that some funding will become available, additional funding will become available to local government in future. And the nature of those funds, when they become available, is one example of the sorts of decisions that we can't yet make until we understand that picture in more fully. So with that, hopefully I've acquitted myself reasonably well there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Really do appreciate that overview through the slides, as well as the information and detail in the report. And thank you for introducing David as well. Really great to have him on board and strengthening our response in this area. There are a few questions coming into the queue. I'll just ask by way of an opening question, Adam, if we do continue down this path of developing the roadmap using the three-pronged approach that you've outlined, will we eventually get to a specific actionable plan that meets the target?
Well, I suppose the thing is that we're the targets are continuing to evolve. The expectation is that when it comes to, for example, the top level eco-city target, that the actions that we'll be proposing and the programs that we'll be proposing through the next LTP will be, in our analysis, those required to achieve that, and then it will be over to elected members as to what level of resourcing they wish to put towards that.
Right,
then again, but just to conclude, there is this question in September coming up of the whether council wishes to commit to being a net zero organisation at some date in the future, and we would approach that question in the same way. So part of what we'll be delivering in September is guidance as to what that would require, and then it'll be over to you as to how quickly and how much and so forth you wish to pursue that.
Great, thank you, Adam. Questions from first Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. I'm just wanting to understand the asset value optimisation a little bit more. Is the intention that approach would be applied to all of council's capital and operational programs?
Well, as much as we're able with the resource that we have, we're seeking to, and we will inevitably have to prioritise the resource there into those areas where we believe the greatest emission reductions are likely to be achieved. These will be areas like fleet and transport more broadly, building energy, for example, some of our process emissions, for example.
So you're suggesting more of a targeted approach?
Well, in a sense, we almost ideally we would get to everything and look at every single last program and say, provide advice. Ultimately, it'll be over to elected members as to understanding the fullness of the different values that you're weighing up and trading off, where there's beyond simply capital and OPEX and carbon, and there's a myriad of other values and considerations that you wish to take into account as is appropriate. But ideally, we would look at everything and say, well, if you wanted to reduce, the total cost to ratepayers and emissions as much as you could, this is how you would go about doing that. And so we would have looked at large capital budgets and small operational budgets and say, well, with these changes, maybe there's additional investment here that's going to require additional borrowing, perhaps. And again, there'll be all sorts of other considerations as to what might be appropriate in that situation. But we'd be providing you with that advice to say, well, here's what you would do in this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Adam, for this report and for your presentation. That was actually it was quite helpful. But I still have a few questions that I'm just trying to wrap my head around. And I guess I'll start with your response to Councillor Naylor. You said ideally, if we were to look at all of those, ideally we'd want to look at the full picture and provide that sort of best value, I guess, in offsetting. I guess I haven't quite heard what is it that is stopping us from sort of doing that now. With that, is that resourcing, or is that?
Yeah. So I mean, it's a council that is involved in a enormous number of activities, which you'll know better than I, perhaps even. When you look at the list of programs in the current LTP, and we're beginning work on developing some early work on developing the next already. That there's an enormous amount of a variety of scope in different programs, and I guess part of the question is, to what extent do we wish to cover everything in low detail, or do we focus our attention on particular areas and go into greater depth as to understanding, perhaps for a particular building, let's start again. So you could, for example, solar. You could look at all buildings and do a generic desktop analysis and say, well, in general, and we have done this, given the reduced costs of solar panels that we're seeing, that continuing to come down in price quite dramatically, in general, there are opportunities to deliver solar. But, however, when you drill down into the detail of particular buildings, you need to really understand, well, what's the energy profile of that building currently? How appropriate are solar panels? Are they correctly aligned with the sun, north facing, at a sort of 40-degree angle, or is there, inefficiencies there? Is the roof able to actually support that, and so forth? So, does that sort of answer your question? We're beginning that work now,
Can I just add to that, Councillor Dingwall? So as Adam has usefully summarised, the council has a significant work program, a significant number of programs. You would have seen all those in the LTP. Adam and David are doing their best to work alongside a range of staff developing and delivering programs to understand asset value optimisation and the delivery of that. The reality is we're in a capability development phase. So this is not the sort of work that we were doing 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So one of the strategies with the low carbon fund was to dip our toes or start this process. And as as I said, Adam and David are working alongside staff across the organisation to help try and raise the capability and understanding around how we tackle this issue going forward. So in part it's a resourcing issue, but in terms of doing everything, but in part it's also a capability issue. There aren't it's an area of that, as I said, we're growing capability. So probably just leave it there.
Cool. Thank you for that. So I guess I have a heap of questions, but I guess I'll try and do this next one. So I guess looking at the process then, because we've got this low carbon roadmap, and you've set out the different I guess projects that we're going to be looking at with your the 3 streams there. How does that fit in with the things that we've been doing so far, how does it sort of all connect, I guess, with that? I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that, you know, in 2011, when this council decided to do the go zero carbon to become a zero carbon organization by 2050, and then sort of the plans that have come through from that, and, you know, all the adjustments that have happened since then, and now all the I guess when I'm looking at, we've got the zero carbon feasibility study, the low carbon roadmap, the emissions reduction plan, and these are things that you're saying that are coming to the chamber soon. At which points in all of that does it all connect so that we can actually, as councillors, start to make those decisions around the resourcing and increasing capability and all of that?
It's a very broad question, Councillor. I'll do my best to answer. So to begin with, considering our work to date, I think it would be fair to say that what we have achieved has been largely opportunistic in nature, in that we're so stretching back, you know, even into 2 decades ago, 15 years ago, but more recently with the work that we've done around our inventories and looking at, you know, targeting our work a little bit more. This has largely been, what we've achieved has largely been achieved through existing budgets that weren't necessarily scaled in order to be able to achieve that, but where we found some money or a way to deliver something at low cost, or perhaps if there's a, you know, a subsidy available through central government or what have you, LED lighting, street lighting, for example. And we, I suppose, are now transitioning towards an area, a way in which we're understanding, okay, well, look, we're not necessarily constrained by capital, or we don't need to be necessarily, if we can look at the lifetime cost of a particular asset and say, well, actually, the total cost of ratepayers, even once we're including the interest costs there, are going to be lower, and we're going to save carbon as a bonus. And so that's what the Low Carbon Fund is currently achieving in a admittedly quite a limited way, and we'll look forward to reporting that to you in more detail in what's been achieved there. But we, in order to move to a systematic approach where we're not just simply saying, hey, look, we've got, you know, some additional fund left over here because there was an underspend in this situation, and maybe we, you know, an officer's sort of come up with a clever idea or found some money, and then we've done something, and instead moving to in a way in which we've looked as much as possible across our programs and our assets and said, well, how can we do this in a way that is prioritizing our investment in terms of where we're actually going to achieve the most or the greatest wins, and then working our way down that list. So that's the transition period that we're currently in. So we've started that work through the Low Carbon Fund, and given budgets have been over the next 2 years and change, I've already largely been set. Our view, or our advice to you, is that the next LTP is the real opportunity in order to complete that transition from ad hoc to systematic.
But so I suppose just quickly to follow on from that, if we wait till the LTP then to sort of look at the resourcing across the whole lot, wouldn't that be a massive undertaking, and wouldn't it be easier to sort of chunk it up a bit more beforehand so we understood how it all connects when it comes to the long-term plan, I guess? Or are you looking at, by the time we get to the long-term plan, each of those line items would have, you know, this is what we could do to improve the carbon, our emissions. I'm just trying to get into logistical, like how do we, when it comes to the long-term plan, how would that look to elected members, I guess, in trying to help us form whatever decisions we needed to make at that point. Sorry, David, Adam.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say, in terms of the next LTP, while it's adopted in 2024, we start the work on the next LTP late this year. So, you know, I think if there's a sense that if you've in some way interpreted that we're not going to be doing anything until 2024, that's definitely not the case.
I think sorry, it wasn't that we weren't doing anything. It was that more that how do elected members understand which bits will need to be potentially resourced more to achieve whatever it is that we need to achieve to get to the goals. I think it's more around sort of what our understanding of each of the different projects are before we head into that LTP thing and how it all fits together. Like, at what point do councillors end up being involved in that process?
Sure. I think it would be fair to say that the information and the form in which your deliberations or the information, the form in which the information you're given in your next LTP deliberations is still to be determined. But that I think the opportunity in terms of what it is that you will, for you to tell us what it is that you require in order to make those decisions effectively, that we have something of an opportunity in September when we report to you the low carbon fund activities for this financial, to sort of have a preview of what that work looks like, what kinds of information that we've been gathering, and then if it were that you needed additional pieces of information in order to make those decisions in the next LTP, that would be perhaps a good opportunity to tell us, and then we would also incorporate that into the following low carbon fund report in 12 months thereafter.
Okay, I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, we'll go to your questions and then look to move to a break after that, but go ahead with your questions, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. Thanks, Adam. The first one is just around forestry. So you had listed forestry in the list of priorities. I'm not very clear whether that is a sort of a planting more forestry priority, or maybe you could just expand on that so I could be clear what that priority is, because the others are presumably all about reductions, but is that about sequestering carbon?
Yes. I guess we're really looking to analyse forestry in much the same way as the rest, where we would see, well, here's what a planted group of trees might or would sequester over time, and what emissions they would offset, and what the cost of that would be. Of course, with forestry, it can be more complicated by there being a whole range of other values that that trees can give, whether biodiversity or holding in changes to water courses and holding back water and things, water quality and quantity. But in the broadest sense, we'd be looking at that in the same way as an opportunity to reduce emissions. However, there's potentially some other tools that we can look at in order to potentially help or hinder private or third-party forestry in certain areas, depending on what's required. I guess I don't have too much of an answer for you at this stage, except to say we have done some analysis of some areas where there's potentially quite attractive investment opportunities for us to look at sequestering carbon at low cost.
Okay, good. Thank you for expanding on that. And my other question was just around, and I guess it touches a little bit where Councillor Dingwall was, in terms of when we get looking at the LTP line items. At the moment, we have a financial cost to each one. Could we get to the stage where at least some of the programs that are in your 4 priorities would have a carbon cost or a carbon benefit against them, so that we'd be able to use their impact on carbon emissions as part of the prioritising process for those programmes?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that asset value optimization element where we'll be doing our analysis, and this will be targeted at those areas of where the highest emissions are involved. We'd be presenting to you, look, here's an option for delivery of this this program, or perhaps it's a standalone program. Here's its capital cost. Here's the reductions perhaps in electricity costs associated with delivering that, and here's the carbon saving as a result of implementing this. And then it enables you to very easily see, well, okay, that particular program allows us to save each ton of carbon at $50, and this particular program here enables us to save a carbon at negative $30, a ton of carbon at negative $30. In other words, it's something that we would look to do anyway from a purely financial point of view, and the carbon bonus is a bonus. So, like I said, our goal is to try and do that analysis on as much of the city's the council's emissions as we can, and so we would work our way down, starting at those largest areas and covering as much as we could. And then, yeah, as you say, that information would be provided, and you could make those decisions as you see fit.
Oh, that would be excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Look, we've been underway now for a while, and there's other questions coming into the queue. I'll suggest that we break the meeting now and look to come back at 11:05. So see you at 11:05, and we'll continue the meeting at that point. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to the resumption of the Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting of the 30th of March. We are still in item 9, which is the low carbon road map, and partway through questions there to Adam Jarvis, who's presented his report in that regard. Next questions go to the Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I heard your voice from the distance, so I ran back. Thank you. Look, Adam, thanks for the report. Just, I suppose my question's around, isn't citywide reductions the main or bigger aim here? Council obviously has started our journey, and I think, personally, I think we can do more, but we certainly started and we're doing reasonably well. But isn't it the city, the other, other businesses, other organisations, isn't that the main aim?
Sorry, I suppose as far as climate change,
yes or no would be fine.
Sure, I'll just say that in terms of climate change, that doesn't emissions, where emissions come from doesn't matter, right? So emissions, a ton of carbon emitted in one place is the same as any other. I guess the question for us is where we're likely to be able to achieve emission reductions through our actions for the lowest sort of total resource.
But shouldn't so let's say we get to our goal eventually, and the rest of the city's in an opposite direction. Isn't that failure?
Sure. I mean, sorry. In terms of our stated targets, we want to see a reduction in citywide emissions. So there's no question about that. And we're only a small part of the city as us. Yeah. I guess all I'm saying is that if we're to have the most possible impact in terms of reduction of emissions, then we need to carefully understand what emissions national government through its emissions plan is looking to achieve, and then understand, okay, within that space, where are we going to have the biggest emissions reductions? Our own organisation is the easiest place to achieve that, but then obviously the city is at a much broader scale, so there's great opportunities there, particularly in the transport and land use planning spaces. So it's definitely not an either or, it's a both. It's just a question of being cognizant of the fact that we're only a very small part of the city in terms from a resource point of view, that we're absolutely swamped by national government even within the city, let alone in terms of the total resources that they have at their command. And so if we're to maximise the total emissions that are reduced through our actions, then we just need to be quite careful about where we're targeting the resources that we have. That's all I'm saying. So absolutely agree with you that citywide emissions are, if anything, more important just because of the scale of the city compared to ourselves.
So one more question, Mr. Chair. So influencing those influences, like we've just heard what Massey are doing, and look, it's a lot of it sort of mirroring what we should be doing too, or are doing in some cases. But wouldn't it be other, influencing other organisations? I'm just grabbing a couple of names, maybe the DHB, maybe the Defence Force, maybe who are all quasi-government and probably should be doing this anyway. Maybe Toyota New Zealand, Fonterra, who are Sustainable Business Council members. Shouldn't we be trying to say to them, hey guys, we're doing this as a city, come on, jump on board?
So we've done quite a bit of work already with, Lana mentioned in her presentation that we've been in dialogue and on the Massey side for many years. I've engaged personally with the DHB over a number of years in terms of supporting them and supporting both regional and other TAs, because we're sort of conscious that we have a role in terms of being the only territorial authority of sufficient scale to be able to really hire dedicated expertise in this space, that we have a role to be playing in terms of supporting those other TAs as well. So we've worked quite closely with them and invested quite a bit of time in helping them with their own inventories and thinking about policies from these perspectives. So no argument from me in terms of working with others. I guess it's just a question of how much can realistically be achieved in absence of say national policy, where if there's a clear incentives for a private business to be reducing emissions, but they don't know how, for example, or want to work in with us to achieve economies of scale, very, very keen to be involved in those conversations. But I think in the absence of that, or the conversation becomes a lot more difficult from my perspective, at least.
Well, you work with those that want to do it first, don't you? It's working with the coalition of the willing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've answered it. Thanks, Adam.
Right, just check in around the queue. Councillor Dingwall, are you back in with additional questions?
I am, but I'm happy for other people to jump in ahead of me if needed.
No, you're next in line, so over to you.
Cool. So I've only got 3 more, hopefully. Dr. Alana Ryan talked earlier about the partnerships, and I was just wondering, with this process that we're on, how much engagement are we having with tangata whenua, with rangatane, essentially, with everything that we're doing in this space?
So I think, across the council and at our climate change office, such as it is, we have an excellent relationship with rangitane. We work with them on a virtually a daily basis, but certainly a weekly basis. We've reiterated over a number of occasions that the same sort of degree of support that we've been providing to the other TAs is also available to them, if not more so, given their special relationship with us. I can't necessarily get into the detail about what that looks like, except to say that we're very, very conscious of that. We have an excellent working relationship with them, if I may say, and I have every expectation that will continue to strengthen in the future as they continue on their journey.
Okay. With the other point she made was of us understanding our own data, and so I was just wondering, with the dashboards there, the current ones that we have on our website around EcoCity talks about our biggest emissions being essentially transport, agriculture, and energy. And I was just wondering how often that ends up getting updated, and I suppose you're looking at it all the time, but when does that get updated for the rest of us on the website?
Sure. So thank you for sending through that ahead of time. We had a chance to look, and it seems that the dashboard hadn't been updated. As far as the inventories are concerned, we've moved with the employment of a second FTE in the office to reporting the citywide emissions annually, and that was sort of a key message that we received from elected members last year, that you were wanting to see more up-to-date information. We unfortunately, a lot of the data sources that we rely on aren't necessarily published. We'd actually hope to get you that information for the 2021 calendar year to this committee. That hasn't been possible. Large gaps that we're still filling in, and as they're published, say for example, from central government. So we're hoping to deliver that to you in May, and that will probably generally be the guidance that we could deliver in the near future as well in subsequent years. So that's citywide emissions. The organisational emissions inventory is functionally complete now, but we're just pending the audited that being audited, and then we would report that to the next committee. In both cases, as soon as those reports of those inventories have been delivered to you, the dashboard should be updated immediately thereafter. And honestly, I thought it had been, but obviously something's got lost somewhere, so I will follow that up and make sure that that's updated later this week.
Cool. And my final question is around, I guess, and so I'm not sure if it should be directed to you or someone else, but it's around, I guess, the visibility of all of the work that council is doing in this space, and our ability to sort of communicate that to the wider community so that they understand this journey that we're on. So around, what kind of comms plan do we have around what we've done so far and what's going to happen in the future?
Sure. So at the moment, the plan is essentially where those inventories have been published. We've pushed out comms there. There's the biannual sustainability report, which I understand is coming to you in the not too distant future, which contains a section on carbon. And then alongside that, there's where there's strategy changes and the like. So that's sort of been our approach at the moment for the moment, where there's been a significant piece of work or update that's been published. We've then looked to push that out. And I would expect, for example, depending on the decisions that are made in the September committee regarding a journey for the organisation towards zero carbon or net zero carbon, and that we would then look to, share that that pathway or that would be the word decision, and that what we'd be looking to do over the in order to achieve that with the public as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much. That's been very helpful.
Councillor Johnson, looks like you're back in the queue as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just had one more question based on the Mayor's questions. So, Adam, in the attachment where you've got the flow chart, my read of that was that the bottom line is all about citywide reduction, and the top line is about internal reduction, and possibly the second line is about internal reduction as well. So would it be fair to say that the low carbon roadmap includes both citywide and our own internal emissions?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. We're trying to be as agnostic as we can in terms of emissions, as I explained to the Mayor. That bottom, that green pathway, as you say, is about emission reductions. The middle section there is about reducing emissions at the lowest cost. But we're also cognizant of the fact that if you're looking to be more ambitious than merely that and to achieve particular deadlines and so forth, that there may be additional work required at ultimately higher costs. So we take on board whatever targets you set there, and then develop a list of programs about achieving those longer term objectives for your consideration, which is what that lighter blue work stream is about.
Yeah, so basically this is about focusing on citywide reduction as well as our own reductions, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. Just a final question from me, and then you'll be to the finish line. Quite a few questions, but it's a good indication of interest. Probably best answered as well with reference to the diagram that's on page 26 of the agenda, which is that flow chart. Reasonably clear to me how that interfaces with the long-term plan. It's less clear how the roadmap will interface with other planning, regulatory type instruments that council has that could potentially serve the same purpose of achieving emissions reduction. Can you give us a sense of where the thinking is on that and what we might expect by way of interface with things like the district plan, some of the regulatory function of council, etc.?
Sure. So I could answer in brief, and then perhaps David will have more to say. Essentially, I suppose that in trying to condense down quite a bit of information to a small little boxes, we've necessarily had to cut some elements. I think that we focus primarily on that long-term plan in terms of budget setting and so forth, which has been the sort of key topic of this particular day. But that nonetheless, as you're very well as you're well aware, we have a whole series of strategic documents which set guidance regarding what it is that we're expecting in terms of emissions and what sorts of policy levers we're looking to pull, most notably the Eco-City strategy and the climate change plan. And so the expectation is, in much the same way as we've discussed program analysis a lot, you'll see in the third box there in that green work stream, we're also talking about policy analysis. So just as we'd be presenting programs to be for your consideration, there would also be a consideration and analysis done regarding potential policy changes, which again could be which would be incorporated into an update of the Eco-City or the climate change plan, and then filtered through into district planning and so forth. But
thank you.
David might have.
Nothing for that. I think you've summarised that really well, Adam. You know that all the arrows leading to the 2024 LTP is more than just programs and budgets. As Adam's explained, there's strategies and plans that cover all of our business and activities that are all reviewed as part of the LTP process, and would expect that the National Emissions Reduction Plan lens would be applied to that policy analysis that informs the review of those documents in the lead up to the next LTP.
Great, thank you, David. Thank you, Adam. You'll be relieved to know there are no further questions. Thank you, much appreciated, Adam, for the presentation and the comprehensive answers to questions. Just move now to recommendations. There's the two recommendations in the paper and a third recommendation as well. I'll seek to read through all three, starting from one and then look to consider all three of them together, but obviously we'll test the will of the meeting as that goes. So the first recommendation is that the Council endorse the flowchart detailed in the Low Carbon Roadmap attached to the memorandum titled Low Carbon Roadmap, presented to the 30 March 2022 Environmental Sustainability Committee. Secondly, that the Council endorse the three approaches which are listed in 2.14, being internal asset value optimization, carbon neutral program development, and citywide reduction projects that complement national direction. The third recommendation is that the Chief Executive continues to develop the low carbon roadmap and report to Council in 2023 with specific options and actions to achieve the citywide goal of 30% reduction in emissions by 2031, and that the proposed scope and methodology of that report be presented to the Environmental Sustainability Committee in September 2022. I'm happy to move those as indicated, and I understand Councillor Butt is happy to second those. So just to briefly speak by way of introduction before other comments come in, saw something the other day that said the glaciers are moving and we need to be as well, and I thought, yeah, that pretty well sums it up. We definitely need to be moving, and much as we said when we first set out to establish a roadmap, it was very clear that we needed an overarching framework and a guiding approach to ensure that we are being as effective as we can with every decision, with every dollar as we move forward. So really, firstly, want to thank the officers for the work that's gone in to developing this framework and bringing it to us for endorsement. I think it sets out a useful direction and parameter for us to build on. Particularly appreciate the carbon accounting focus coming into the long-term plan, as well as the other activities that are connected there. Very happy to endorse the three-pronged approach. I think that the asset optimization, carbon neutral approach, and as many of the questions pointed out, the much bigger tranche of emissions gains to be made through the citywide side of things are very well considered in terms of a way to approach addressing the meeting and the achieving of this target. So I kind of see this roadmap as a good first edition, but very keen that we do keep pressing forward, which is specifically why that third recommendation sits there. And it's to ensure that we get from where we are now, which is a framework and a direction, to a specific actionable plan that the community understands, that we understand, and that tracks us towards and in fact achieves that target in time. So I'd ask for your support across the three of those. I think that with the National Emissions Reduction Plan coming into focus in the near term, that will give us a really great way to filter through and inform that actionable level of plan and work with the community in that regard. So again, thank you to officers for the work to date, and would ask for your support of all three of the recommendations in front of us. So we have two comments so far. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just wanted to make some comments about this. First of all, just wanted to say thank you very much to Adam and David for the work that's gone into this. And I think it's a really good example of the need to be really nimble in this space, because it's a rapidly changing space in terms of policy and direction. And I think when we as a council embarked on this goal, there was not a lot of direction coming from central government at all. But now central government has caught up with Palmerston North City Council. We've got a lot clearer direction on the way that things will be going nationally. And I think that obviously that does mean that we need to review our focus and our sphere of influence, I suppose. So the government directions will have the bigger impact on the citywide emissions. We still have a role in terms of what policy we'll put out, also an influencing role and an educational role, and I'm pleased to see that that's in the work programme as the lower limb of that action plan. So that's very good, but I do think we've got a lot of potential here for future carbon savings if they're done in a very systematic way. And I'm very excited by the possibility of being able to prioritise programmes and work not only on the cost to ratepayers, as we do at the moment, but also on the carbon cost or the carbon saving. And I'm even more excited that carbon saving often equates to dollar saving. So I think that this is a win-win, really, in terms of being able to look at programmes to achieve savings, both in terms of carbon emissions and in terms of actual dollars spent. This is really, I mean, of all of the work that we're doing as council, this is one of the most important streams of work. It's future focused. We heard this morning about the potential for cost savings just on buildings, on their lifetime costs, but also in terms of increasing resiliency. And we've got a lot of costs coming down the line to us in dealing with more and more unstable climate that we, need to do our absolute level best to mitigate. So I don't think, and we can underestimate how important this work is. I noted some of the comments about resourcing that were made in an earlier item. We did increase resourcing in the last term plan for this work, but again, we'll need to be open to what resourcing is required to achieve this in the next long-term plan. So I'm very pleased to be able to support these recommendations. I'm pleased with the work that we've been doing. As I say, we did start it possibly quite early in the piece compared to government, but nevertheless, we can now streamline the approach with the government approach and make sure that, going forward, we're we're being purposeful and doing what we can in the areas in which we have influence. So I'm very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to, I guess, express my gratitude to the staff for putting together this low carbon roadmap. I need to get my wording right, but the low carbon roadmap, because climate change is a massive beast, and it is really difficult to sort of encompass everything into a couple of pages of a plan for us. And I guess what I'm getting from that is, there is no silver bullet here. There's no one thing that we can do that will dramatically had that dramatic impact on climate change, which is why we need to do constant and urgent action across all of the things that we do. And I think that's the bit that I'm struggling with at the moment. I've been feeling the urgency and the frustration that a lot of our members of our community have been feeling around what council is doing to combat climate change, and what and how council can, I guess, enable everyone else in the city to do their bit. And I know that we've been doing some amazing work here and there, but having a plan that kind of sets it all out and shows us what our direction is, and how we can encourage the rest of the city to go on their journeys as well, is so important. And I think comms plays a big part of that as well. The partnerships definitely play a big part of that. And being able to get the data and translate the data into, I guess, language that people who aren't scientists, like myself, can understand easily and sort of track where we're going and what needs to happen. So for me, it's been really difficult in the last 2.5 years on council to see how I can influence action happening in this space. And so it's really good to sort of see this plan starting to form, but I am really, really excited for whatever happens after this. So I guess thanks to the staff for the work that they're doing. Really keen to see a bit more tangible things. I would love to see the points where, we can look at what we're actually doing to achieve these goals, what tangible actions we can take, what resources do we need in each of the different areas, and basically how council could do our part in getting climate action happening in our city. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I agree with most of the comments that have been made, not all of them, but some of them. Look, I firstly acknowledge Adam and welcome David to Palmerston North and to PNCC. One thing, we will all agree on, this is really important work. I want to focus less on what council's doing because, we can drill down on that, and I think we actually have been doing some good work, and I've certainly been telling that story. Our staff have, and maybe that needs to be defined a little bit better. The case studies around our council and many units are enormous. Renewable energy that's been developed not only by council but around us is another big and good story as well. But it's actually influencing the influencers, and the city-wide reductions is which I think is the bigger or main goal as well. We can get down to whatever level, but if the city hasn't, then I think we've failed. So it's actually how do we influence government and other quasi-government. It's great to see Massey, and I think Massey are on board well and truly, if not slightly ahead in this space. So it's others, it's the DHB, it's New Zealand Defence Force, it's other big government employers here and what they're doing. But I also think it's businesses as well. And we can influence our own CCOs as well. Airport are doing that now, but also the Regent and other facilities, stadium, etc. But it's the business community and other organisations where we really need to encourage to do this work. We've got some good examples, the Toyota New Zealands, Fonterra, have been showing to do this work themselves. But we need other businesses to do that as well. And I think that's where some leadership, some education, some communication, and getting maybe these organisations, Mr. Chair, to come to this committee and present what they're doing. And we invite them. So I just want to acknowledge your leadership in this space too, because it was actually you that pushed this along in your first term of council. And at the time, some of us were sceptical, but actually it was really, really good work. But yeah, we've got a long way to go, but we've started the journey. But it's actually and. It's the city council emissions, but actually in reductions, but it's actually the city-wide as well. So I support your recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Not seeing any further comments coming onto screen, and haven't seen any calls to separate any of the items. So that being the case, I'll ask that we move now to the vote on all three recommendations and ask for those voting in favor. Great, thank you. Any votes opposed? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Again, seeing none, and that is then passed unanimously. Thank you all for the support in that matter. Looking to our final item then on the agenda, which is item 10, the work schedule, page 27 onwards. Just ask our Chief Planning Officer if there's any comment or reference that needs to be made there before seeing if there's any questions from elected members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No specific comments other than say it's going to be another busy year, and particularly in the climate change space, and we've got those a couple of additional recommendations today, which will result in report backs on the Green Building Council and the sort of scope and methodology for the report on the low carbon roadmap. So happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. There are a couple. Firstly, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Item 5, the Environmental Sustainability Report. We've just got late 2022. Is that, can we pin that down any further? Or is the reason why it's a bit vague?
It'll be after the election, so it depends, I guess, to an extent on when
so we don't
the
know
committee's
what
meeting, and it may, whether it's late 2022 or even early 2023 potentially.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with the, again, just trying to make sure that I have all my titles relating to the right reports. With the Environmental Sustainability Report, is that the follow-up from the Environmental Sustainability Review?
Yeah, I think in some places it's been called review, and other places it's been called report, but it's the annual environmental sustainability report.
Cool.
So same thing.
Very helpful, thank you. And so with that, will that be tracking, I guess, the changes from that previous report, and whether we're going up or down, or how we, will there be a comparison with the previous report in that?
As much as we can. I think, as we've talked in the past, there's always a balance between creating a narrative which is interesting to read, and a document which is tracking our progress. So that work is underway at the moment in terms of preparing that report.
Cool, thank you. And my other question was around the green canopy thing, because I remember Councillor Barrett and the Deputy Mayor made some calls around budgets around our street trees, and I was wondering if there was a report coming back to Council on that, and if it would end up here, or if it's in a different work schedule, or just around the percentage of canopy cover in urban environments and amount of street trees being removed or replaced, and
I'd have to check in with governance and go back and check the resolutions on that. I recall there was some conversation around detailed conversation around street tree budgets as part of the LTP, which would have been addressed as part of the LTP. But I'd have to go back and check the plans and actions and any resolutions regarding that matter.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks. It looks like the Assistant Chief Executive also has a comment, perhaps in reply, around the sustainability report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to let you know that sustainability report is on track to come to the May meeting of the Environmental Sustainability Committee. And we have reviewed the initial inaugural report and made improvements upon that. So it won't be tracking against that report, but it'll be looking at what we learnt from doing that report and incorporating data where we can, but focusing on the stories and the good work that's actually been done in the interim around sustainability.
Thank you, Cheryl. So can I ask then to clarify, is that building towards an annual reporting mechanism that will also include trackability across years?
I think some of the data is difficult to track because it's either not available annually or it's one of those, it's slow burn, if you like, and a track through other mechanisms, particularly through the monitoring tool and also through Adam's reports that he does. So we'll be more looking at what data is available that's actually on an annual basis, such as, for example, looking at green corridors, planting, etc. So looking at more sort of operational sort of achievements that have occurred over that time.
Great, thank you for that. And with the report coming to us in 2 months' time, that'll give us opportunity to reflect then on the nature of it and next steps in that regard. Thanks for that clarification. Are there any further questions around the work schedule? Seeing none, I'll ask if we can get the recommendation to screen, which I'm happy to move if there's a seconder. Yeah, of course, I can't see many hands. Councillor Johnson, thank you. The committee resolves to receive its work schedule dated 30 March 2022. Moved by myself, seconded by Lorna Johnson. Are there any comments? Probably we'll just briefly comment around the questions around the environmental sustainability report as it is now being cast, and you know, affirming my understanding and intent that this becomes an annual report that is trackable, except the points that there are some challenges and perhaps gaps that we need to think about filling around data availability and perhaps some resourcing around timing to make sure the report comes to us in a timely manner. And finally, a good comms strategy that actually amplifies that report out into the community and helps the 90,000 people, 100,000 people that are living in part of this community understand this journey that we're on, and that's the vital part of that report. So I will look forward to seeing that coming through. No indication of other comments, so I'll ask for a vote on this. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? There being none, that appears to have passed unanimously, which brings us to the end of our meeting. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ina mana, ina reo, tēnā koutou,